Right, welcome everybody. Those of you just coming in now, can you take your seats as soon as you can, please? "33 years ago, on this day, can all of you recall where you were? Many of you would have been either rushing to Lens or to Soweto, because it's on this day exactly that the Rivonia trialists and others were released. And I think there are milestone events in the lives of many of us here. At least for me, this counts as one of them. It is just a day in which you got a sense of being part of a huge historical moment. And although the ANC was only unbanned a few months later, that was almost its de facto unbanning. And we have, since the formation of the Kathrada Foundation, hosted the annual lecture as close to October 15th to commemorate and remember, I think, that historical day. So it's on that note that we welcome all of you here today. We welcome you here in remembrance of that generation that we hold up so much today, because they aspire to and they epitomize the best of our values and traditions. And it's unfortunate that we have to go back that far to look for examples of what we still need to aspire to. But we want to welcome Derek, Trish, Snooki, Valli, Prema, Kamla, and Audrey, and all of you here, Colin, all of you who've taken the time out. We've not had a gathering, an annual lecture physically for the last 2 to 3 years. No, I'm wrong. Last year we did it at the old John Foster Square in commemoration of Timol's 50th death anniversary. But there was all the COVID protocols in place at the time. But this lecture takes place today at a time of just huge crisis. And I suppose all of you know this. Wherever you go, whichever dinner you go to, even at your own family homes, there's just this mood of anxiety, of the country drifting, and being in a crisis and not knowing what to do about that crisis. Fortunately today, we think there's an element of a solution to that crisis, which, when you think about it, is really at its most simplest. Change the quality of people who control a 1.3 million rand budget. And then maybe they will do the right things. But in order to do that, we need to change the way in which we vote to get them there. And then do more than that, is look at the accountability systems, the participatory systems that must complement a change to our electoral system. And that's the focus of today's lecture. But before we move into the other formalities, there are just 2 short things we want to do before we get to the lecture itself. I always find it useful to just dig out archival material on Kathy and Lalu in particular, because memory fades. The visuals of them tend to fade. And for me, there's a need to remind myself of what they sound like and what they look like. And I'm hoping that you will likewise appreciate the little clip that we're going to be playing now.
1929, Ahmed Kathrada was born into an Indian family in Schweizer-Reneke, where apartheid was the law of the land. At a young age, Kathy joined the struggle for liberation. Risking his freedom for the rights for all South Africans, he ultimately faced the death penalty alongside Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu.
Kathy has been in every major political trial until he landed in jail in the Rivonia trial. 1946, 1950, 1952, 1956 treason trial, you name it, every national trial Kathy has been involved.
They were sentenced to life in prison and were sent to Robben Island. People the world over called for their release.
It was a microcosm of how apartheid applied in South Africa. I stayed in the cell for 17 and a half years. If you stood here and looked out, not only can you see Cape Town, which is quite a distance, but the warders going to the harbor with their kids. That was the advantage of the cell. The main deprivation was children. You miss children. Mr. Mandela saw his two little girls when they were 2 and 3. Right. The next time I saw them was when they were over 16. A prisoner never loses hope.
Never ever. Although we were sentenced to life imprisonment, and for political prisoners, life meant life. We want Robben Island to be a monument. One wants to perpetuate the positive aspects, and that is a place of triumph. Because Robben Island played a very important role in the struggle, although we were in prison. And the struggle to crush apartheid was in some ways less difficult than the struggle we are facing now.
After 26 years, Kathy and his comrades walked free, infusing the struggle with new hope.
Very good. I had waited long, and we met again. It was a moving experience, and it became very clear that nowhere in the world the human spirit can be destroyed by a tyrant or an oppressor.
6 months later, Nelson Mandela was also a free man. They negotiated an end to apartheid and set to work building a new nation. Prisoner Mandela became President Mandela. With Kathrada as his advisor, they chose a path of truth and reconciliation over revenge. Old comrades worked with the young leaders to make their highest ideals the law of the land. Kathy taught people in South Africa and around the world about the history, triumphs and lessons of the journey to freedom. He is a vigilant champion of ethical standards and of racial equality.
He has been a great instrument of the movement. That is what he has brought. Confidence in the future.
I found him to be a great fountain of wisdom.
He is a selfless person. He's made an enormous contribution.
You know, he connects to the issues that affect us as ordinary human beings.
He has contributed significantly to our whole nation.
Ahmed Kathrada remained core part of the leadership of our struggle at the time.
Freedom to be achieved has to be fought for, to be sacrificed. There has to be sacrifices. Freedom you don't get on a platter. Nobody has given freedom on a platter to anybody. It has to be fought for.
They had passion for what they were doing. They didn't do it for name and fame.
South Africa belonged to all who live in it, black and white.
They were very brave to make the kind of sacrifices that they made
We are deeply grateful that today we live in a lively democracy.
But he's so warm and he's so humble for a person of his status and his legacy.
But you'd expect someone of his stature to actually be proud and, he'd want to be praised, but that is not who he is.
He's basically teaching us about non-racialism. It's an incredibly good heart in Kathy that I think most people recognize and respond to. And, that is a privilege to live with someone with such a good heart.
His life is a legacy of an ongoing example of the unbeatable power of love and the triumph of the human spirit.
Now, those are just powerful memories, and once more, thanks to Anand Singh for having produced this. Freedom, you don't get it on a platter. I thought that was powerful from Kathy, and I think it's very apt today. We want to welcome online Karen Moon. Now, all of you are aware of the fact that this last week you've seen Karen and Billy Downer in court. But we thought it was important for this lecture, and I'm hoping on behalf of all of you, to express a message of solidarity. And that message of solidarity will be delivered by the Defend Our Democracy campaign and the national coordinator of the Defend Our Democracy movement. Zakira will just read a message of support to Karen, and then she would give us in a very short response to this particular message. Zakira?
Thank you. So on October 19th, 1977, the apartheid government banned the World newspaper and the Weekend World. And the editor at the time was Peter Qobosa, and he was detained and held for 5 months. This day later became known as Black Wednesday, and it's a day that's marked yearly now, and the importance of press freedom is emphasized on this day. But now, close to 3 decades into democracy, one would have thought that acts aimed at targeting journalists or silencing them would have come to a stop. It would have been a thing of the past. However, recent weeks and incidents over the last few years tell us otherwise. Just a few days ago, Karen, who's online at the moment, a News 24 journalist, was in court facing private prosecution by former President Jacob Zuma. And Zuma wants Mon, who has been covering his case, jailed for reporting on his court medical records. So in essence, for doing her work, Zuma seeks to criminalize Mon. And while this may be yet another one of Zuma's Stalingrad tactics, we must question what his actions opens the door for. He has let out of the Pandora box a set of new tactics that can be used to silence those who report on corruption and state capture or any other breach of the law. And with it comes the kind of vicious social media attacks, and we've seen over the last few years people like Karen, Ferial Haffajee, and others coming under attack. And this is symptomatic of the same kind of treatment that people like Tandeka Mbeki, Suna Venter, and others who were part of the SABC 8 underwent several years ago at the public broadcaster. And it's really the singling out of people, the targeting of journalists, making them to to feel as if they have committed a crime for doing their jobs and making a stand for truth and justice. Just recently, Zuma thanked those who fomented violence in his name after he was imprisoned. And this again sends the same signal that any tactic, irrespective of how it may undermine our democracy, may be used to prevent those like Zuma who want to avoid the law from facing up to it. So today we recognize Karen and other journalists like her who reported against the brutalities of apartheid in the past. And you have the Ruth First, Peter Qobosa, the Jubi Mayats, and many others. And today, the many more who are unflinching in carrying out their work. Karen, we stand by you, the many other journalists and activists like you who have reported and exposed corruption and capture and made all of us here all the more wiser in understanding the threats that face our democracy. Thank you.
Karen, over to you. You need to unmute. Oh, you are? No. Well, the invisible hand extends far beyond. Let's just try once more. No, still can't hear you.
Go for it, Karen.
Let's try now.
Okay. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm hoping you can hear me now. I just want to say I'm incredibly overwhelmed and grateful by this gesture of solidarity. It means a huge amount to me, and I'm sure that to Billy Downer as well, who is also facing completely unjustified persecution by former President Zuma, ultimately because he is, like me, just doing his job. I think it's so important to be reminded in this, in this lecture, which is a tribute to Ahmed Kathrada and to the activists who gave up their lives, many of whom died for our democracy today, to just be aware, as he pointed out, that democracy is not something that we ever stop relinquishing. We have to keep fighting for it. And there are a group of people who are intent on undermining that very hard-won freedom so that they can enrich themselves, so that they can do further damage, and so that they can take the prospect of a better life from all of us. And so it's important to hold on to that belief that Ahmed Kathrada and the activists like him had, that we have to keep fighting, and we have to honor their legacy and what they sacrificed in democratic South Africa to ensure that those kind of abuses that they fought to put aside do not recur in democracy. And I'm very, very grateful to all of you for this acknowledgement. I'm grateful for the recognition. Thank you for standing with me. You will no doubt be subjected to bullying and abuse because of it. And it means a lot to me that despite that, you've still chosen to do so. So thank you very, very much.
No, the bullying comes with the territory. When Valli spoke at the electoral reform in Daba, the introduction just called him an activist. And I didn't want to make the same mistake today, so I've asked Razia to in fact introduce Valli, because they've spent the last week traipsing around the Otter Trail. And she perhaps has a bit more to say than just calling him an activist. Razia, over to you to do the introductions.
Hello, everybody.
Valli has asked that I don't introduce him. He says you all know him very well, but I've decided that I'll just ignore him and just introduce him for the record. When the Freedom Charter was drawn up in 1955, the first of its 10 clauses was, "The people shall govern." Today's lecture is a play on this, "The people must govern." Our keynote speaker, Valli Moosa, and we all know him as Valli, was yet to be born when the Freedom Charter was drawn up. But he was instrumental in the birth of our democracy and South Africa's constitution-making process, which was hammered out and adopted in 1996, leading the ANC team in the drafting of the constitution. Valli cut his teeth on student politics in the Black consciousness movement in the 1970s and was an executive member of the South African student organization, SASO, at the time of its banning. Soon thereafter, he embraced Congress or Charterist ideology and was active in the anti-South African Indian Council election campaign of 1981. He helped revive the Transvaal Indian Congress and establish the United Democratic Front, both in 1983. In 1985, when the UDF General Secretary, Papa Malifi, was detained and then charged for treason in what became known as the Delmas treason trial, which then became the longest trial in the history of the country, Valli ably stepped into the position to fill this void. Valli was no stranger to apartheid repression and was first detained in 1980 during the school education boycott. In 1988, he served 14 months in detention before escaping, along with Murphy Marobi, who was the publicity secretary of the UDF, and Vusi Kanile, leader of the National Education Crisis Committee. They took refuge in the US consulate in Johannesburg, drawing worldwide attention to the plight of detainees in South Africa. After the unbanning of the ANC and other political organizations and the release of Nelson Mandela, Valli was then elected to the ANC's National Executive Committee and headed the negotiations portfolio. He represented the ANC and CODESA Working Group 2, which dealt with constitutional principles and the constitution-making process. He served as Deputy Minister of Constitutional and Provincial Affairs in Mariba's government after the 1994 elections, and then stepped in as the minister when Rolf Meyer resigned from the position in 1996. He served as Minister of Environmental Affairs and Tourism from 1999 to 2004, and perhaps is best remembered for paying for the plastic bags when you go shopping and for banning of buggies on the beach. Most recently, he chaired the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Electoral Reform and has written and spoken on the subject quite widely. This makes him the most obvious choice for today's lecture. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to you, Valli.
Thank you very much, Razia and Sean Bolton. Comrades, sisters and brothers, it is indeed a privilege for me to address you on this important occasion. I thought I should remind you about that day. On that day, on 27th April 1994, if you remember, the first photographs of the voting stations started appearing. South Africans stood patiently in long and winding lines, patiently but with determination. Patient but triumphant. Patiently but with heads held high. Among those in the long lines stood the daughter of he who was murdered in John Foster Square. In the line stood the mother of the 15-year-old child who was held in detention without trial. The brother of she who had forsaken it all and joined the People's Army, the father of the child that was shot in cold blood during the Soweto uprisings. In the line stood the loved ones of Steve Biko, of Imam Haroon, of Neil Agate. And as he and she walked out of the voting station, the black smudge on her finger was held high, and the smudged thumb chanted, "Freedom, freedom, freedom at last." On that day, the photographs of the lines kept coming in. South Africans were overcome with emotion. When you looked at those pictures, there was a tear in the eye and a lump in the throat. Even the most hardened amongst us were emotional. Even today, after all the years, that picture of our brothers and sisters lining up to vote remains vivid in the mind's eye. You can see it when I talk about it. We are moved by the images of April 27, 1994, because of what the right to vote and universal adult suffrage means to us, because of the place it occupies in our hearts and minds. This fundamental human right is embedded in the DNA of this nation. South Africans have fought long and hard for the right to vote. As has been said, in 1955, just down the road from here in Kliptown, the Freedom Charter was adopted. The very first aspiration in the Charter reads as follows. I quote, "The people shall govern. Every man and woman shall have the right to vote and to stand as a candidate for all bodies which make laws." Let me repeat this. Every man and woman shall have the right to vote and to stand as a candidate for all bodies which make laws. Note the words. It does not say every man and woman shall be allowed to vote. It says every man and woman shall have the right to vote. Soon after the adoption of the Freedom Charter, in the years that followed, the apartheid regime unleashed brutal repression that culminated in the Sharpeville massacre. And after that, the darkest years of the freedom struggle followed. And then on the 16th of June, 1976, the youth of Soweto said, literally said, "Enough is enough," and called on the people to rise up. I've given quite a lot of thought to that period in recent times. And actually what followed June 16, 1976, was a mass uprising whose sustained intensity over the next 14 years is unsurpassed in modern history. The mass uprising culminated in the 1990 agreement by the regime to come to the table and negotiate the terms on which the hated system of apartheid is dismantled, and in its place established a united, democratic, non-racial and non-sexist South Africa. Many, many people and organizations constituted the revolutionary forces of this period. To mention just a tiny few, the SSRC, the Soweto SRC, SASO, BPC, Black Sash, AZASO, NUSAS, NIC, the Unity Movement, the South African Council of Churches, PEPCO, SAICO, COSAS, AZAPO, FOSATU, NACTU, COSATU, the UDF, actually too many to list. All I can say is, name me an educational institution, name me a city or a town, a village, or name me a church or other place of worship, a factory, a mine, or a bank, and I will name you the freedom fighters who organized there. Many ideological outlooks and a rich variety of viewpoints made up this mass movement. But the golden thread that united what was in fact a great motherland front for freedom was encapsulated by the words Amandla Awetu, power to the people, or meaning the right to elect a government of your choice. Amandla Awetu rang out 1,000 million times in schools, colleges and universities, in factories and mines, in mosques, temples and churches, and from behind the prison walls. The freedom struggle was very much about the right of people to choose their own government. Brothers and sisters, comrades, we are still moved by the images of April 27, 1994, because of what the right to vote and universal adult suffrage means to us, because of the place it occupies in our hearts and minds. When we design a new electoral system, we are giving meaning to the cherished and hard-fought for right to vote. It is a weighty matter that deserves detailed and serious attention. Let's look at what the Constitution says. In Section 19 of the Bill of Rights, it says, quote, "Every adult citizen has the right to vote in elections for any legislative body. Every adult citizen has the right to stand for public office." This right is further elevated to one of the fundamental values on which our nation is founded. On the first page of the Constitution, in Section 1, the Constitution says, "The Republic of South Africa is founded on the following values: universal adult suffrage, a national common voters' roll, regular elections, and a multi-party system of democratic government to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness." In my notes here, I have emphasized those last three words: accountability, responsiveness, and openness. So, sisters and brothers, when we decide on a new electoral system, we carry the weight of the Freedom Charter, the weight of our beloved Constitution, the weight of generations of struggle, and the weight of the lives that were sacrificed. But perhaps most important of all, we carry the heavy weight of the generations to come, the ones to whom we have the biggest responsibility. One of the big challenges of the day is that the leadership of the Democratic Alliance, the DA, and the leadership of the ANC, the party which I belong to, are failing to give serious attention to this very serious of matters. The matter of electoral reform is being dealt with as an administrative issue in a narrow, self-interested manner. Unfortunately, it is not being dealt with as a serious human rights-based constitutional question that has to give expression to an aspiration that runs through the fabric of our nation. But why the present heightened interest in electoral reform among many of us? Of course, the debate was nudged on by the Constitutional Court judgment that found the current act to be unconstitutional. But actually, the current interest in electoral reform is also prompted by other developments. There is a growing distance between Parliament and the people. voters feel that they are simply ignored by members of parliament. The conduct, performance, and ethical values of many MPs makes them undeserving of such high office. If voters had the choice, many of them will not end up in parliament. There is a general lack of accountability. Then there was recently the failure of MPs to bring to book a president and executive who stridently promoted state capture and looting. There is a growing feeling among citizens that actually their votes do not matter that much. We face a serious risk of voter apathy, and we face an even greater risk that as more and more voters feel unrepresented, they turn towards undemocratic means. These are some of the reasons that we should be deeply interested in the electoral system. But before I go any further, I wish to briefly turn to the factors that resulted in the current pure party list system. I want to take your minds back to 1993. By 1993, Nelson Mandela had already been out of prison for about 3 years. And the ANC and other organizations were already unbanned for about that period of time. In those 3 years, the apartheid regime was further weakened significantly. In fact, it was in a rudderless state. The ruling bloc was splintered. The National Party government was holding on to power by a threadbare. The regime was on an unstoppable downward spiral. The biggest danger South Africa faced at that time was not that the regime will refuse to agree to a negotiated transfer of power. The biggest danger was that the regime would implode in a disorganized manner, resulting in utter chaos. The negotiations between Mandela's teams and F.W. de Klerk's teams were not won between equals. By 1993, F.W. de Klerk represented almost nobody, whereas Mandela was already regarded as the leader of South Africa. And then, after the assassination of Chris Hani in April 1993, the danger of an outbreak of uncontrollable chaos loomed large. The people were losing patience. The only sensible way forward was to draw a line in the sand and determine the date on which the regime would actually hand over power. South Africa could wait no longer. So in June 1993, it was decided that democratic elections for a constitutional assembly, which would also double up as a parliament, would be held on 27th April 1994. This was a mere 10 months away. There was no voters' roll. There was no common ID. Millions of South Africans living in the so-called TBVC states were declared foreigners. There were no demarcated constituencies, no provinces as we know them now. African townships were outside the boundaries of municipalities. And there was no possibility of doing anything complicated in a free and fair manner because the country was still under apartheid rule. Under the circumstances, and because the revolution was actually marching on relentlessly, a temporary system had to be put into place. Notwithstanding its temporary nature, the electoral system needed to have certain important features. The outcome had to be inclusive. No significant body of voter opinion should be unrepresented in the Constitutional Assembly. voter preference should be accurately reflected in the composition of the Constitutional Assembly, hence proportional representation. The procedure for voting should be uncomplicated. Remember that the overwhelming majority of South Africans had no experience of voting. Therefore, the system allowed for voters to vote anywhere they found themselves and for any party of their choice. The ballot paper would simply reflect the name and a photograph of the party leader. Voter eligibility was simplified. There was no registration, there was no voter's roll. A wide variety of documents for identification purposes were accepted. Indelible ink was used to prevent anyone from voting more than once. And then the outcome of the elections had to be easy to understand. Nobody knew whether the people of South Africa would accept the outcome as being free and fair. It was being conducted under apartheid. So the outcome had to be easily understandable how eventually you arrived at a certain election result. And hence the proportional system, which is easy to understand. Now, when in June 1993, it was decided that elections will be held in 10 months' time, the first elections ever in the history of this country. You know, these days, I find it interesting when we are under the rule of bureaucrats that nothing can happen quickly. Everything has to take many, many, many years. This is 10 years' time. That 10 months' time it had to happen. And when that decision was taken, there was no electoral system. Nothing. We had agreed on nothing. The electoral system was only agreed to in November 1993, 6 months before the elections happened. That's when the electoral system was agreed to between the parties. Everybody signed up. We said it would be what you know it is to be. It was the understanding that the democratically elected parliament would be able to then afterwards give proper and detailed consideration to determine a better and more permanent electoral system, and one that links MPs to voters in a more direct manner. Now, if there's any doubt about this, let's look at the words of the founding father of our democracy. President Mandela served a 5-year term as President of the Republic and as Member of Parliament. By the end of his 5-year term, at the very last sitting of Parliament of that term, which was held on the 26th of March 1999, President Mandela delivered his last speech to Parliament. And what he did was, of course, by that time, when he was elected as president, he relinquishes his seat as Parliament. That's how the Constitution works. So technically, he wasn't a member of Parliament. It's merely a technicality. So he was addressing the MPs and telling them what he thought about their performance. He was full of praise. Well, I must say justifiable praise. I was a member of Parliament at the time. So, and Derek Anekom was a member of Parliament, and you know. Anyway, so he was full of praise about the achievements of the first democratic parliament. And he said of its work, and I quote, "This is a record in which we can take pride," unquote. And then immediately he went on to say the following: "But even as we do so, that is, take pride in our achievements, we need to ask whether we need to re-examine our electoral system so as to improve the nature of our relationship as public representatives with voters," exclamation mark in his speech. So if there's any doubt anybody had that this was actually meant to be a temporary thing, a quick fix for the first democratic elections, That's the guidance Madiba was giving. Of course, as it turns out, many MPs got into Parliament by riding on the coattails of a popular leader or that of the popularity of their party. I'm not referring to ANC MPs, by the way. This is true for all of the MPs, all of the parties as such. And such MPs had no incentive to create a system which would require them to face voters directly. One would be forgiven for believing that the biggest fear of the MP is to explain to voters why he or she deserves to get the vote. Now, there are certain essential characteristics, qualities, and features of the South African democracy that must be properly understood when we consider an electoral system, and I'd like to enumerate a few of them. Firstly, the Constitution says government must practice openness, accountability, and responsiveness. The second feature of our democracy is that the elections must result in a proportional outcome. In other words, proportional representation is entrenched in our Constitution, so that we don't get the kind of situation in the UK where more people vote for the Labour Party, but the Conservative Party controls the House of Commons, or where Trump got in with fewer votes than his opposition, but he became the... So we can't, our system doesn't allow for that outcome. If the majority of the people vote for X, that's how it will then be reflected in Parliament. So proportional representation is not a nice to have. And frankly, it's not up for debate, because that's a characteristic of modern democracies. You've had in the early establishment of democracies, in the UK they called a mother of democracies, they had all sorts of ways and means of tempering the aspirations of the masses, because the upper classes in the UK always felt the masses are completely irresponsible and you can't leave it to them to choose the government. So they had the House of Lords, for example, and this and that and whatnot, and they called Parliament the House of Commons, and they still call it that. The third feature I want to make reference to is the voting procedure and the method of counting should be understandable to the ordinary citizen in order to guarantee legitimacy to the outcome. It is not accidental that in all the elections that we've had, national, provincial, and all the local government elections, the outcome has been legitimate. People often didn't like the outcome, like the ANC lost the elections in Joburg. Who would have thought? But the ANC didn't say they were cheated. They were just terribly unhappy about it and tried to form coalitions and do all sorts of other things. So this is something we must not undermine, that the manner in which elections are conducted and the manner in which it's counted and the manner in which people are given voter education must be such that people will be able to see that and believe that the outcome is as it is. The fourth point is citizens must actually participate in elections. You can have the best electoral system and all that, but if people don't go to vote, what's the point of it? So a high voter turnout is essential to the functioning of our democracy and most democracy as we know it. The fifth point is that there should be more than one legitimate political parties. Remember, our Constitution says, right in section 1 of the Constitution, the section I read out to you earlier, it says, in order to guarantee a multi-party system of democratic government. Our Constitution, in fact, says that this democracy will only work if there are political parties. That's a point I'm going to return to just now. In fact, we don't know of modern democracies that can function without the existence of the political party as an institution. And then the final point to make is that ours is a parliamentary system, one in which the people elect Parliament, and then Parliament chooses one from amongst themselves to be the president of the country. this is entrenched in the Constitution. It's not a policy of Parliament. This is a constitutional matter. It's a parliamentary system. Once again, with some of the developments recently, some people have said, why don't we have a directly elected president? In my view, that will take us back. It won't take us forward. The checks and balances of a parliamentary system is absolutely vital. You may recall the last president got into trouble with his own party, and then the leadership of the party, the NEC, asked him to step aside. And then he said he's not going to do so. And then the Speaker of Parliament convened a meeting of Parliament, and on the agenda was to vote out the president. And on that day, the president then submitted his resignation. So you've got that check and balance is absolutely important. And it's also important to protect us against demagogues. So our criticism of the current bill that serves before Parliament is not one which is linked to the question of a directly elected president. Nor is it one which questions proportional representation. In fact, proportional representation is entrenched. Nor is it one that questions the need for us to have political parties. Let's be clear. A parliament composed principally of independent members is unworkable and a recipe for ungovernability. It can lead to paralysis of decision-making, incoherence in policy, frequent changes in who forms the government, and extreme short-termism. And also, let's be frank, there will be a wholesale buying and selling of MPs. I mean bribing MPs to vote for or against something. Of course, the current attraction many have to the idea of independent candidates is the result of the shameful conduct of the leaders of our political parties, none more so than the conduct of the ANC. This conduct is characterized by lack of accountability, a lack of responsiveness, collective defense of wrongdoers, wrongdoers placed on party lists election after election, members of parliament caring nothing about public opinion, members do everything to impress the party leadership and care absolutely nothing about anybody else, certainly not the voters. So if political parties are the lifeblood of our democracy, then the political party as an entity should be governed by law. A gang of drug dealers or a private business entity or an autocratic foreign government should not be able to disguise itself as a political party. Today, there is no equivalent of the King Code of Good Governance and Companies Act that regulates business. There is no equivalent of the comprehensive set of labor laws that governs our trade unions. There is no equivalent of the professional bodies that regulate the affairs of lawyers, medical practitioners, and other people. The most powerful public entity in society, the political party, is largely unregulated. And our parties are known for not practicing good governance. This is a major contributor to the growing antipathy towards political parties. I'm not exaggerating about good governance, you know. Call a leader in the top leadership of the EFF or the DA or the ANC and ask them, what is their budget for next year? Or at least what's their budget for the current year? They will not be able to give you that answer. They are not told what's the budget. They don't adopt the budget and approve it. That's the basic element of good governance, is to approve, you know, who can spend what money. So the one piece of regulation, the Political Party Funding Act, that requires parties to reveal their source of funds is being resisted by the ANC and the DA. They have already made a pact to repeal the most important elements of the Act. Let me make it clear. Our political parties are an important national asset. They are a vital component of our democracy. They bring it to life, they make it illustrative, they give it the passion and drama it deserves, they mobilize the masses into participating in the democratic process, and they fire up the imagination of the media. But let me make it even clearer. If our political parties obfuscate their internal processes, spurn public opinion, think nothing of placing persons of disrepute in leadership, if they are funded by proceeds of theft, or captured by one or two large donors, and if they do not require elected representatives to ever answer directly to voters, then we are in trouble. The citizens of the Republic will turn their backs on political parties. They will lose confidence in our democratic order. Many will simply be alienated from the political process. How often do you not hear the completely misguided but fully understandable refrain? They are all the same. Nothing will change. My vote will not make a difference. Just by the way, how often have you encountered persons who otherwise consider themselves to be enlightened and socially conscious members of society say something like, I am angry. I'm angry. I'm sure you hear that quite a lot. I heard from a lot of people, very angry, I'm angry. Others would say, I'm disillusioned. Now, that is often used as a reason for justifying the abandonment of their duty to society. Let's be frank. I am angry, full stop, and I am disillusioned, full stop, does not constitute a program of action for change. Let's get back to political parties. If our major political parties continue to disempower citizens and care absolutely nothing, that we face the risk of continued alienation of the people from democratic process, they risk being discarded by voters. But this is not the biggest danger. The emptiness left by political parties will be filled by something. Nature does not leave a vacuum. Nature never leaves a vacuum. History abounds with examples of what happens. Look at the recent election of the sexist, xenophobic, tax-cheating Donald Trump. Look at the recent election of the industrial-scale thief, Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi in Italy. Look at the election of the democracy-hating President Bolsonaro in Brazil, the biggest country in South America. Look at the rule of the lying Brexit demagogues who got the British masses to vote against their own best interests by whipping up racism and jingoism. And look at the rise of the fascist right in Hungary, Italy, France, Sweden, and elsewhere in Europe. The common thread in a lot of these cases is the loss of faith by the masses in the traditional parties. What are the lessons for us? You take money secretly from disreputable funders, and demagogues will outdo you at doing that. You take money secretly from disreputable foreign governments, and soon you will find that demagogues can do that better. You get captured by one or two big funders, and you will find the undesirable elements can do that even better. You rubbish the courts, and you open the field for demagogues. You do xenophobia, and demagogues can do it better than you. You attack and weaken press freedom, and you open the way for demagogues to do it with greater enthusiasm. You treat civil society with contempt, and you lay the foundations for demagogues to do this more efficiently. You turn your parliamentarians into nothing more than dull and dead conveyors of his master's voice, and you lay the foundation for it to become a useful tool for a dictator. You put on your party list persons of utter disrepute, and all you do is show that democracy does not work. Not long ago, members of the party that led our glorious freedom struggle were prepared to kill, but not to protect our hard-won freedoms. They were prepared to kill for a thoroughly corrupt leader. Taking all this into account, a few conclusions can be made about the current Electoral Act Amendment Bill. Now, this bill attempts to accommodate independent candidates without changing the current pure party list system. But the current system was specifically designed to accommodate only political parties. So they are putting a square peg into a round hole. The result is not rational, to say the least. Firstly, it is a completely new electoral system, not backed up by any literature or analysis. Not a single political party has published any analytical paper explaining the wisdom of the proposed new system. It is a system that does not exist anywhere else in the world. By the way, if you've heard this before, I just want you to know these two paragraphs I'm quoting myself, which I think it's this is a system that does not exist anywhere else in the world, perhaps for good reason. So without any political analysis and without any mathematical analysis, the risk of unintended consequences are very high. Secondly, it violates the constitutional requirement of proportional representation. Votes cast for independent candidates above a certain quota are discarded, removed from the count. Gone is now the long-held strength of our electoral system, in which we could say that every vote counts. Thirdly, it is so complex and complicated that hardly anyone in the political leadership of our country seems to understand it. I've personally spoken to a number of them. Not only are they unable to explain the thinking behind the proposed system, many have no knowledge of the detail in the bill. It would be safe to assume that most ordinary members of the EFF, DA, and ANC, I'm just speaking on the three big parties, have not been consulted on the proposed system. A system shrouded in mystery provides fertile ground for Trump-like claims of being cheated. Fourthly, the principle of one person, one vote of equal value is disregarded. A voter can either vote for an independent or vote for a party list. If the voter puts an X next to the name of an independent, she gets to influence the filling of one seat in Parliament. If the voter votes for a party list, she gets to influence the filling of something like 80 seats. Now, remember the one big thing about our legal and constitutional order is rationality. The courts don't like it when Parliament is irrational. They strike it down, they say this is irrational, and they strike it down. Now, the basic idea of voting is the exercise of choice. And you choose between two of the same species. You say, either vote for X, Mr. X, or vote for Mrs. Y. It's the same species. But here, you're going to have the choice of either voting for a person or a party list, which is a completely irrational thing to do. Up to now, you were voting for different party lists. Choose the party lists of the DA or of the EFF. Make up your mind. You can choose whichever one you want to. This is a democracy. You won't be attacked. But now you don't have that. This is a completely irrational thing. I mean, it's incredulous that this could even have come into a seriously considered bill. Now, there is a fanciful idea that the province should be considered as a constituency. Now, let's look at this a little bit. Let's take the Eastern Cape province, which is quite a big province. Now, every independent candidate from that province will have his or her name on the same ballot paper. Every independent candidate. There'll be one ballot paper for the whole province. And then, let me just give you some idea. In the local government elections in 2021, in that province there were a total of 11,237 independent candidates in the Eastern Cape. Let's say some of them may want to feel they want to run for national elections also. Let's say about 10% of them decide they want to run for national elections. That means you could have just over 1,000 independent candidates for the Eastern Cape. So now you're going to have a ballot paper with a long list of political parties and about 1,000 independent candidates, like a little novel that you will get when you go into the voting station, and now you must vote intelligently. So then what is said is, okay, well, we'll make it very difficult for independent candidates to qualify. Then you'll have a much fewer number. And so they've been playing around with these numbers in Parliament. I think the latest number is about 8,000 signatures that an independent candidate must accumulate in order to succeed. I know a lot of you, in fact, almost all of you sitting in this audience, because I've been around for such a long time. Oh, can you believe it? Anyway, but I can tell you most of you will struggle. You are all experienced activists around. You'll struggle to pull together 8,000 signatures, proper name, proper ID, in a verifiable manner. Because somebody's got to be able to prove, you've got to be able to prove that you just didn't write down all the names from some phone book or buy a database from somewhere. In a verifiable manner, you will struggle to do so. So one of the consequences of when you do something, it's like, when, who was I talking to? I was talking to Derek Hanekom about telling lies. Now, sometimes you tell a lie about a small thing. Derek invites me to dinner. Actually, I don't want to go and spend an evening with him. I'm just tired, and he's quite boring after the first 30 minutes. So I say, Derek, I'm not going to be in town, I'm going to be in Tokyo. So I can't come. So I don't tell him what he would have found quite acceptable. Listen, Derek, I just want a break. I want to be at home. I think he would. I don't tell him that. So next thing, I'm not in Tokyo. He hears that I'm not in Tokyo. Then I've got to tell another lie about why I'm not in Tokyo. Actually, I was supposed to be in Tokyo, but I got to the airport and I got late. I missed the flight, and I wasn't lying. So it becomes, so when you come up with something irrational, you sort of multiply, you dig yourselves into a bigger hole. So one of the consequences of this is, how do independent candidates qualify? You've got to make it very stringent. And once you make it very stringent, I read to you the Freedom Charter, I read to you what the Constitution says, all of those sorts of things. It says that people have the right to participate in elections. So if you make it too onerous, you're actually taking that right away. You can't say, you can participate, but we're going to make it extremely difficult for you to participate. But what's even worse is the qualification criteria for independent candidates is more difficult than the qualification criteria for people on party lists. Now, I don't know, what can I say? You be the judge. This is going to be challenged. It can't be constitutional in any sort of way. Now, the complex and convoluted system in the bill is the result of the mortal fear that our MPs have of direct accountability to voters. As I've said earlier, they seem to fear nothing more than to be judged directly by people. The bill before Parliament is seriously defective. It is shamelessly cynical of the Constitutional Court order, and it insults the electorate. It does not pay heed to the good counsel of President Mandela as he was signing off after his 5-year term. The bill is not in keeping with the spirit and the letter of the South African Constitution. It is inconsistent with the Freedom Charter, and it ignores that rallying call of the glorious freedom struggle, Amandla Awetu. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Valli. We invited the DA and the ANC as the two biggest parties to come and respond to the lecture. Both parties immediately acknowledged receipt and indicated that we would hear from them as to who the speaker would be. Up until now, the DA hasn't indicated to me who the speaker would be. So let me just check in the audience, is there anybody that's been sent by the DA and I haven't been notified? No? Okay, so that chair will remain like that. I'm told that the ANC speaker is here, the respondent, Snooki Zikalala, the chair of the Veterans League. Am I correct, Ms. Snooki? Won't you, the president of the Veterans League? Is the president? Okay, my apologies. Won't you please come up to join us as well? In terms of being the respondent to this on behalf of the ANC, we're going to allocate you your 10 minutes to do that. And thereafter, it's a conversation by yourselves. You've heard what the issue is, and the discussion is not going to be about, it's not a question and answer session, but it's about your thoughts on what needs to be done. So I'm giving you advance notice to think about what it is that you would want to say. But let me just, before we get Snooki's response, Comrade Snooki's response, how many of you voted in 2019? Okay, sizable number. How many of you have had engagements with more than 5 members of parliament in your area since 2019? No. Has anybody? You don't know who they are. But is there anybody that more, you Valli? Because you work with them. All right, I mean, that's a one visit to parliament and you've engaged with all of them. How many of you voted in 2019 in the local government elections? 2021 year. How many of you have had some contact via WhatsApp or something or the other with your ward councillors since then? Sizable number. And you know why? What's the difference? Is that you know where he or she stays. You know where he or she stays, and you can go and on that WhatsApp group and you can say, here's my issue. What are you doing about it? What can you do about it? Many of them in their own ways have set up their own WhatsApp groups, and even if they don't know what to do about the problem, as a minimum they'll come and say, there is this issue and we're trying to resolve it. Or the famous new term now, we're escalating it. You know, there's an escalation system now, so we're escalating it. But at least they do that. You have railway stations across the length and breadth of this country that have been demolished. I don't know of a single member of parliament that has said, I'm going to sit in the Minister of Transport's office until my constituency there, this railways thing is resolved. because they don't understand what it means for people in Orange Farm to now having to take 2 and 3 taxis to get to Sandton, because that railway structure has been completely demolished. And that's the difference. That's the difference that it makes to have a representative for a particular constituency. But local government is not perfect. Your ward councillor can be elected, they can disappear. You can't recall them. The political party can recall them, you can't recall them. So a new system would have to take in the weaknesses of the local government system in order to improve on it. If we want to go in that direction, the mixed party system and a constituency system. But, Comrade Snooki, maybe you want to tell us why the ANC is supporting the bill in the form that it currently is. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think I was ambushed sometime this morning by the Minister of Home Affairs, Comrade Mzoledi, who said I must come and represent him. I knew nothing about this bill, and let me be honest. And he looked for people. He's in Limpopo currently, and he's unable to come. But basically his message is that the ANC as it stands now, it does not really support the amendment bill and is prepared to engage with members of the civil society, because the civil society are very important to the ANC. Because in our constitution we make it very clear that the people shall govern. And so if you don't listen to civil society, what it means is that we're a dictator to society, and society will take us out immediately. And so the ANC is committed to listen to its electorate, to listen to South African citizens, and to make amendments that are needed to ensure that society participate actively in governance. As we all know that the biggest problem that we face as South Africans is lack of accountability from parliamentarians or from councillors. There is no accountability. All of them are afraid to account. Even within the national executive, where we and Comrade Derek and myself sit, if you talk about accountability, especially to ministers, they think that you attack them. If you tell them that, look, the ESCOM is in a mess, we are in charge of ESCOM, you should be accountable. They feel that it's a direct attack to them. And yet you are saying that you must fix the problem. That is why you're there. You're there to serve society. And so for us, we especially as veterans, will monitor the situation and make sure that the ANC accounts to society, and the ANC meets members of civil society, and ANC serves society. That's what we have to ensure that it happens. And of course, we re-examine the Electoral Amendment Bill and make sure that we say who we are in terms of representing society. It's all that I can say. Thank you.
I'm so glad we have this on record. And I appreciate the at least the indicator of a willingness to engage. And if that could be conveyed back to the minister, I think at least there's something positive that would have come out of today's gathering. So, and we want to appreciate your presence on behalf of the ANC here as well. Can I just get some help? Irfan? Irfan? Is the Skinner over there? Just some help with mics, if we can just do. I'm going to hijack particularly, is Tessa here? Tessa, okay, I see your hand up there. Just a quick response to what you've heard. And then I want to engage in an audience conversation on your thoughts on what needs to be done. Tessa, 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tessa Dooms from the Rivonia Circle. And in the civil society space, as many of you will know, we've been part of rallying around rejecting this bill. And I think there's two things that are really important, and particularly now that the ANC has made the concession that they're willing to engage meaningfully on this. The first thing is that Parliament has put us in the situation that we are in now by dragging its feet on this bill. The bill was, the Constitutional Court judgment was in 2020 of June, and really only work on this started towards the end of last year, and it was started by the Minister of Home Affairs. And the bill that's on the table came as a selection of the same minister that has now given us the heads up that the ANC doesn't support this. But they've put us in the situation where we are now under time pressure, because by the 10th of December, based on the court ruling, that's the final time that Parliament has in order to make this bill a rational constitutional bill. And so we must put Parliament under pressure to do this right, because the thing about this is, number one, it has implications for our next election. It has implications for 2024. If we go and we take an unconstitutional voting system to go and vote with, we will be declaring our own elections not to be free and fair. That's what's at stake. The second thing is, if we then challenge the bill because it's not constitutional and it is not fair before the 24 election, then the IEC doesn't have enough time to run an election. Right now, our parliamentarians are, for their own sakes and for their own party's interests, jeopardizing our entire system, our entire country, our entire democracy, and we must not allow it. The second thing, though, is that there is a second option that came out of the same process that Valli Moosa and others were tasked with, the Ministerial Advisory Committee. And that option was the majority option even in that committee that the minister put together. The minister chose to go with the bill that we have now, rather than an option that said, let's just replicate with some adjustments something we've already tried and tested, the local government system that already allows for independent candidates. We've done that a few times over now. We've tried and tested our own system. That was rejected by the minister and the ANC. And I think we have a very quick solution here. Just go to the option that was already put through a process and an option that we've already tried and tested, and we can fast track getting to a better solution. Thanks, Nisha.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Right. I'm going to allow Irfan, if we can just take a round of hands here. 1 minute is for your contributions, please. I don't want long speeches. What I do want to know from you is, what do you think must be done? If there is something that you think is not clear, then please identify the issue that requires clarity. But more importantly, what do you think needs to be done to get the required pressure onto all of our political parties to change a system that is not going to be, it's not going to work, but is not going to be in the interest of anybody if it is pushed through as well. So I see one hand, two there, and I see number 3 here. Good, let's start.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. I wanted to ask...
Your name, please?
My name is Visile Matona. Yes, I'm from Innovating Kasi organization. I wanted to ask Mr. Moosa that he criticized the UK system and then he criticized the US system. Can we possibly go the China route, whereby we look at the merit? When we elect you, you must be qualified for that position. And then you mustn't have been found involved in corruption. If that's the case, then we send you to the Hangpal. Will it work?
Okay.
Thanks.
Whatever the MP is, we don't want to know, but you can keep that one there. Ibrahim?
Thank you, Sean. My name is Ibrahim Saluji. I've just put down a few pointers which I think could perhaps have some kind of solution. Can I just read them out to you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The current electoral process is seriously flawed, that we all know of. The late Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert clearly, I outlined this, and of course that was just put on the back burner. It suits the political parties to continue with the process that is in place at the moment because there is no accountability. The process needs to be changed, but the political parties will not make this change possible because it doesn't suit them. How do we address the current situation, bearing in mind that the national and provincial elections are scheduled for 2024? The best possible option is to form residents' associations based on the same basis as the electoral system that we currently have in existence. The residents' associations will be best suited and geared to elect representatives from their areas to represent them. These residents' associations can then be represented at the National Residents Association and forming into a political party which can then contest the elections in 2024. In this way, we can then be in a control of both national and provincial structures. There are many good people in various political parties whom I'm sure wouldn't mind joining a residents' association if they still do want to get into parliament, but they will be accountable to people at ground level. And maybe that could be your solution in the short term, because I can't see this government or any political party out there wanting to change the status quo as long as they are in control and as long as they can put their fingers into the cookie jar as long as they want to.
Your 1 minute is up. Thank you. There was a hand here.
Just a short input.
No, short issue. Yeah, very short.
I know, just a little. Yeah, it's directed to the panel of these two comrades. You will agree with me if I'm saying to you that no, our electoral system is outdated now and it needs to be amended, reform. Don't buy this thing of this so-called flawed electoral bill. What must be done in future? I think Comrade Valli and Comrade Snook is that I want to input that we must have a hybrid form of electoral system whereby it's made of constituencies and also of the proportional party representation, whereby we make all those who are policyholders be accountable and able to be recalled if they blunders. And finally also that some of them, without mentioning their names, including our presidents, if our electoral system was amended, they won't be where they are now. If I mention the name, allow me, sorry, Zuma won't be serving 9 years term if our system was okay. So there's some flaws that need to be closed in our system. It's outdated. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Right, there's the last speaker on this side behind. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Kungo Chebe. I'm a member of the Right to Know campaign. I still remember vividly when we were getting in and out of the Concord, fighting for the independence. No. But at last we won. Because of why? It's no longer as it was that people shall govern. It doesn't. Then now what the political parties are doing is that people are counting more to them, rather than the people who voted for them into power. They neither even doing the accountability, you know. Now we are still stuck now. If we are not careful, our country is becoming a non-developmental state, is heading towards that way. Then I appeal to you, Comrade Valli, then the stringent measures that you spoke about, rethink about it. Rethink about it. We can't even ask the people who are doing such of corrupt things, you know, who you are. Now I'm accountable to my political party. What comes first? Is it people or political party? It's the same issue. We are in a dilemma now of being regulating now even the coalition governments. That's another debate that we need to get into. It once happened in Germany.
Good, thank you.
This issue, we really need it.
Okay, I think we've noted that. Okay, I wanted to finish off on this side. I see one hand right on top there, Irfan. You're going to get a lot of exercise now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Hussein Bismillah. I don't belong to any political party, any fixed organization other than me, perhaps just the Johannesburg Institute of Social Services. Just one or two observations. Firstly, I think a constitutional form of political system won't work in this country simply because, like in the past, like for example in the old pre-apartheid, in apartheid era, you had the National Party was so powerful, and although there was opposition against it, because in no constituency did sort of progressive voices have any numbers. As a result, you couldn't collate the progressive voices from each province into one sort of political party, into one big number, which allowed them to have many seats in parliament. As a result, we only had Helen Suzman, from Houghton, one seat. As a result, I think in this country, because of the demographics in this country, I don't think because the indigenous African people have such a big majority, I think the other minorities that have come here who are South African won't have a say if we go into a constituency type of system. Proportional, with regard to the proportional system, I think this is a start. So whilst it's not, one doesn't know all the answers, at least it's a start, and one can improvise on that. So whilst there is this question about accountability and the need for accountability, so at least the process has started. Whilst we don't know the answers, all complex issues, people don't have answers for. But over time, as we work out the practicalities of things, and as the problems arise, one can improvise. So essentially, those are the two comments I'd like to make.
No, and thanks for that. I think it just introduces the elements that people might be thinking about, but not feeling too easy to raise them. Thanks for raising that. I want to just halt this here for now and ask Valli and Snooki whether you have any thoughts about or responses to the issues that have been raised so far. Okay, while you're deciding who's going and who's staying, so who's going, who's staying?
Thank you very much. Most of the speakers were commenting, and so I don't want to respond to everybody. I think that the first speaker, Tessa Dooms, I agree with you quite strongly, I must say, in what you've said. It's, and you've articulated it in a much better manner than I would be able to. It is not true, as some people say, that the administrative challenges of demarcating constituencies cannot be done for the 2024 elections. It can be done quite easily. As you know, that the IEC organizes voters' rolls according to voting districts. And the voting districts are the smallest units. And if you have a collection of voting districts, you immediately have a constituency. It's all in their computer system. They can do it quite easily. In fact, some people are of the view that if Parliament does not do what the court ordered it to do, remember that Parliament missed the 2-year deadline, which expired on the 11th of June, 2022. And then the Constitutional Court gave Parliament a grace of another 6 months. If it doesn't do so, there's a possibility that the court may order an election, may make an order. And there are examples of similar high apex courts around the world that have done such a thing, where government just refuses to do so. A big example is if you take the city of New Delhi, which is one of the most polluted cities in the world, and the court people would go to the court and say that the government must make regulations about air pollution, and the government fails to do so, and the court made the regulations. Court says the regulations will be the following. So there's a possibility that our court may decide on something like what you were saying. The China route, I don't know that much, I must say, about China, except to say that in the recent past I've read quite a bit about the anti-corruption measures in China, and I think that those are wonderful, and it seems that they're decisive about it. Our country has been going through renewal and anti-corruption campaigns since President Ramaphosa came in, and I know a lot of people say that not much has happened, but if you look at it closely, I think a tremendous amount has been achieved. If you just think back to where we were a few years ago, and so we're in the midst of a big renewal campaign here too. I don't think the Chinese system of choosing leaders will work for us. We're a different lot of people. We all want to have our own say. We talk as we want to. We attack the government. We attack the president and all that. I think in China it's not going to really work. If we're a different lot of people. We want an open democracy. We're a bit different with that. That's our tradition, and I think our systems can work for us. Just to say about the last speaker, you must not make the mistake of counterposing proportional representation with constituencies. People are making that mistake. People think if you have a constituency system, you don't have a proportional outcome. Our constitution says there must be a proportional outcome. So there cannot be an underrepresentation of any significant body of opinion in the Republic. Otherwise, the new electoral system will not be constitutional. So you must not counterpose those two. In fact, in a local government system, that's what you have. That people get their constituencies and then you balance it out in order to ensure there's proportional representation. Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah. Just to add to what Comrade Valli is saying, Comrade Monsoledi said that the constitutional amendments and looking deeply into the bill itself will be addressed immediately after elections, after 2024. He says he's committed to that, and it will depend entirely on the input of civil society. And so after getting more input from civil society, is then that the African National Congress will be able to act on recommendations of civil society. And so the ANC is committed to what civil society is saying. Currently, he's saying that they want to go through the court processes. Once they are done, is then that be able to look at what civil society wants, and we'll be able to commit to that. Thanks.
Thank you. No, I think the repeated assurance is just wonderful to hear. Let me get, and thanks, Colin and Mrs. Coleman. Thank you for your presence here, Audrey. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, let's get some hands from the center here. There's some hands up there. There's Lukona, and then there's one behind him. And there's one here. So the centrists are now coming in.
Yes, Shan, and I'm center left where I'm seated. Good afternoon. My name is Lukona Mngoni from the Rivonia Circle. Dadusnuki, I have high regard for you. I'm just dismayed that the minister gave you a lie of a brief, because the ANC supported this electoral amendment bill on Wednesday in Parliament. The DA and EFF opposed, but for very minimalistic reasons and not the kinds of reasons that Valli Moosa is talking to. The truth is that we are going to be forced to litigate on this bill and run the risk of what the Constitutional Court actually said it doesn't want to do, which is a right-in into the law, which powers it has. I'm also disappointed, Dadusnuki, that from your input, it seems as if the National Executive Committee of the ANC has not discussed this bill. That's what your input is telling me, if I'm reading it correctly. That is very dangerous. That a party that confers to itself as a leader of society its highest decision-making body has not read or debated the bill, which is unfortunate, because in the discussion documents to the National General Council, the ANC developed 3 options on how to attack the amendments necessitated by the Constitutional Court. It then tells me that the ANC has no position on this issue. This is a very dangerous situation. How do we trust you with governing the country? It's astonishing. I'm shocked. I'm really shocked, to tell the truth.
Okay, let's get over the shock. Next speaker.
My name is Samuel Johnson, and mine is firstly to give thanks to the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation as well as the Rivonia Circle. Nami, I'm shooked, and I think I've taken 20 seconds off the 1 minute that's given. However, I'd like to plead for a possible 30 seconds more, because
just speak. You're already wasting your time.
Thank you. No, yeah. My level of shooked is coming from the fact that the voting systems of this country are getting changed, and we as the young people of this country are in the majority, and the one that's already in place isn't working and accommodating us. So automatically, when everything is said and done, there's already discussions that are overlooking the youth, speaking to something that affects the youth. I think the leaders that are here today need to also start questioning, why is it the youth are abstaining from voting? We're speaking today about constitutional voting systems, we speak about proportional. But are we speaking to the needs of the people that need to be the ones that are going to the voting polls? So that is why I'm saying defend our democracy, Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, as well as the Rivonia Circle. Thank you for having conversations that are allowing us to interrogate. But I'm saying I'm disappointed in the leading party and all other organizations. They know the IEC continually gives us stats that young people don't go out to vote. And instead of interrogating that, because the speaker said, and I quote, please allow me, in the emptiness of the promises of the political organizations, we are opening room for something to fill that up. And whatever is going to fill it up is quite dangerous. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, if I move to my left, can I get an indication here who wants to say anything on my left? Coming down. Okay, just one here.
Thank you so much. It's Ponsipule speaking, just a concerned citizen. I think I'm paralyzed about what the speaker said earlier on because of the articulation that he put across the session today. But I think it's important that we need to decamp this discussion out of this building to the taxi rank, to schools, to colleges, to universities, so that we begin to conscientize everyone. Because what we need to have a People's Congress to deal with all of these flaws. I don't think the electoral bill is the only flaw that we are picking up. So we need as people to come together. Youth are beginning to speak now. We need to bring them into the discussion so that we as the nation can assemble at one point and discuss exactly how we expect the country to move going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a hand here, Isma. Yeah, we'll come here first and then we'll go behind you.
Thanks very much, Ismail Vadi, speaking in his personal capacity. I think the Parliament has put itself in a very difficult position now. It's got 6 weeks within which to process this bill. The Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs has already voted on the bill, so that means it will go to the National Assembly. And if the National Assembly approves it, it will go to the National Council of Provinces for further examination and voting, after which it goes to the President. And it's really a 6 weeks window period. So we must, I think, establish whether the Minister is prepared to enter into discussions with civil society immediately, so that we can see whether Parliament can correct some of the inherent weaknesses that it has, well, National Assembly particularly, inherent weaknesses in the bill that Valli so eloquently has addressed. If that can be done, then it behoves civil society to create or to establish a common alternative position, because I don't think civil society has a coherent common view on the alternatives. So if it says that it accepts the majority report that Valli's committee chaired, that he chaired, the committee that process, then that creates the platform for what we go to the Minister with and to the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs to begin to address. If we can't do it in the next 6 weeks, well, this matter is definitely going to go to the Constitutional Court. And the court could do one of two things. It might strike down the amendable bill as unconstitutional and leave a vacuum. That means the 2024 elections will be run based on the current system, or the Constitutional Court might impose. It's very reluctant to do that normally, but it might say that in the public interest and for the credibility of the 2024 elections, it might impose, well, the amendments. That's really what it is, the changes that people so desire. That will be an unfortunate situation. So I think what we really need to do as civil society is to put pressure for an urgent meeting with the Minister, like in this week, with possibly the study group of the ANC that deals with this, the Home Affairs study group, and to see whether we can't salvage the situation in the public interest.
Thank you very much. Joanne?
Thank you, Ian Huntley. I used to run the Rivonia section of Groundswell, which was a constitutional education thing. We abandoned it after the Electoral Act was put in place, but we had broad agreement across all the parties 30 years ago on direct representation, right of recall, and referenda, which are all the items that people seem to be calling for today, to have a direct say. Now that's based on one of the world's oldest and I would say most mature constitutions and democracies, the Swiss-based system. It works with a very divergent population. You know, you've got Italian, French, German, etc., Flemish in that. It seems to work there. So why don't we just shortcut some of these, put some of those on the table?
Okay, we will get a response about what we can shortcut and what we can't. Let me just see, is there anybody else? Any bright idea, any groundbreaking proposal that you want us to take forward? Martin, anything from your side? Nothing? Colin is gone. Okay, let's come back to our two panelists here. Daud, is there somebody there? No? Let's get, can we get the mic here? Or you got a mic here?
Ismail Wadi is a veteran member of parliament, so he can guide civil society in what can be done. I must just say, Ismail, that we're not out of time if we really want to. If we really want to do this thing, we're not out of time. It's not, these things can be done. The problem that you have is the ANC has not discussed what's before Parliament now, and how are you going to get the NEC to discuss, to change that? It's a dysfunctional situation that you've got, and that's part of the problem that you've got. And so Lukona made the point that he was shocked. You know, is he still here? You very eloquently. You were not overstated. It is absolutely shocking that you fiddle around with the most fundamental of all rights, the right to vote, in a light-handed manner. It's not even discussed. It's not even discussed. I mean, my comrade Snooky here, who is president of the Veterans League, of which I'm a member, has just been launched into this situation. I don't think it's fair for us to hold him accountable. But it's not been discussed by members of parliament. It is just shocking. And it's not just the ANC. The EFF and the DA is the same. I know the leadership people in all these parties, like I've been around. And I call these people up. I say, just now tell me what made you do this thing. They said, what are you talking about? I know nothing about it. All of them. It is a shocking situation. And so part of what we may need to do is inform the court that this is what it is. And the court may well have to do what it doesn't want to do, which it has done in a few occasions. You remember in the case of Batabilet Lamini, where she just refused to carry out any court order. They then said, every quarter you will come and give us an administrative report on your progress. And it's just unheard of to have a court judgment of that sort, but they did that. So there's a chance that they may do this kind of thing. But if anybody has a way of getting the political leaders of this country to understand that you don't play around with the right to vote because you're playing with fire. That's what you're doing. Not one of our elections has been challenged up to now. The outcome has been accepted by the masses. But you know of countries where after the election there's violence and looting and chaos and all of that. And that's what we are inviting, because people will say, who put these people in power? Thanks.
Thanks, Valli. Commissioner? No?
He
He's covered you, okay. Zakira, where are you? Can you talk to us about this campaign of Defend Our Democracy and with everybody else, what's being done, what you want people here to do? I know you're sitting there in the corner, you're running a big campaign, but you want to keep it quiet. A big thanks to our speakers as well.
Thanks, everyone. So together with a few civil society organizations, some of whom are in the room, Rivonia Circle, Kathrada Foundation, and others, we've now formed a campaign coalition for electoral reform. It welcomes individuals as well. We meet every Wednesday. If anyone is interested in joining, please let me know. We will add you to that database. And we're basically calling for people to get involved in a few things. One is just to understand the issue, to read up about it. We've got a campaign toolkit that's online as well. Our social media details will have that information where you can find it, where you're able to take a kind of presentation into your community, your university, wherever you're based, and do a workshop on electoral reform. And like Mr. Moosa today, take people through why this is important leading to the 2024 elections. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we really want people to do is start emailing your MPs. Parliament has the databases of different MPs online on their on their site. If you want particular details of MPs, you can get in touch with us as well. Consistently email them leading into December when the president is meant to vote on this, asking them the same questions that were raised here. Do you know about this bill? Do you know what you're voting about or what you're not voting about? And why are you taking a particular position? We did this a few days ago when we launched this campaign, and we're already starting to receive responses from some MPs saying, thank you for this, but why are you taking this tone with us? If you spoke to us in a better way, maybe we would have listened to you. So I'm not too sure how they're interpreting it, but we ask you to do the same. Just call up people within your constituencies, in the constituency office, and ask them for an explanation. And I think that sort of public pressure is important. Over the next 2 months, we'll be having a range of events in different provinces led by different organizations. In the Western Cape later this month, I think there's going to be a picket outside Parliament. And closer to December, we haven't yet, I think, got down to the logistics of it, but we are looking at having something outside the union buildings, because the final point of pressure is really the president of the country who has to sign off on this bill. And our call to him is exactly what this poster says here. Mr. President, don't sign the flawed electoral amendment bill. And then the last thing is that if all else fails, I think that civil society organizations will consider a legal strategy. And really that's the last sort of step that we want to be taking, but it's not something that we will not consider.
Thanks, Akira. So there is a plan. There is a broad range of organizations working. They do need more support. The point raised by the youth speaker there is absolutely critical, but it's incumbent upon you and other young people who are here today to create and develop the strategy and the message that will go to other young people. Don't wait for somebody here to come and do that work for you. All of you who are here from the Kathrada youth clubs today, you have a responsibility to understand this issue and to begin to organize the workshops in each and every community to start talking about this. Because at some point, you are going to have to show as a country that there are people who are saying this is wrong, and you're going to have to demonstrate that by having those numbers of people in the street, if nothing else. So, thanks to Valli, thanks to Snooki, thanks to all of the other people online as well who've contributed. We are almost at the end of today. This lecture ends every year with recognizing an organization or an individual that has done outstanding work to combat racism in the country. And today it's just a wonderful honor and privilege to be able to do that to an organization that has taken up fought and won the most horrendous hate speech that we've seen in the country targeting a particular group or a particular community. But I'm going to leave that to our anti-racism manager, Retabile Ratsomo, to come and just give you more details about this and to give you the citation of the award. Thereafter, our board chairperson, I know he's resisting, he's in fact hoping I had forgotten that he needs to come and just do the formalities about some closing remark. But Derek, you're going to have to come and do that after Retabile. Retabile?
Good day, everyone. As Mr. Bolton mentioned, my name is Retabile Ratsumo, and I am the Anti-Racism Program Manager at the Foundation. I'm very honored to stand here today and present this award. It usually goes to an individual or an organization that has shown commitment to tackling the prevalent and urgent issue of racism in our country. This year, we have chosen to recognize the Chinese Association of Gauteng. But before I call them up to receive their award, I would just like to share a couple words and start off with a quote by Nelson Mandela. This quote reads, and yet however hard the battle will be, we will not surrender. Whatever the time it will take, we will not tire. The very fact that racism degrades both the perpetrator and the victim commands that if we are true to our commitment to protect human dignity, we fight on until victory is achieved. The Chinese Association of Gauteng was founded in 1903 and is the oldest Chinese association in South Africa. Most of their work relates to the interests of the Chinese community, whilst at the same time partnering and working together with the broader South African community in developing a mutual understanding of each other through various community functions to promote cultural and social interaction. The Chinese Association instituted action in the Equality Court in 2017 over harmful and discriminatory remarks and comments that were posted on the Facebook page of Carte Blanche. Some of these comments stated that the Chinese people should be wiped out and that we should start killing their children. The Chinese Association of Gauteng identified 12 people who had made discriminatory statements and began proceedings in the Equality Court against them to declare that their statements constituted hate speech. The association also asked the Equality Court to make an order requiring them to publish an apology, attend a human rights sensitization course, and pay damages and legal costs. After 5 long years, the matter was wrapped up in the Equality Court, which found that the comments made about Chinese people on Facebook constituted hate speech in terms of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. The guilty parties were further ordered to apologize and pay damages for hate speech comments posted on Facebook directed at the Chinese community. The Ahmed Kathrada Foundation is honored to award this year's Anti-Racism Award to the Chinese Association of Gauteng. Their commitment to a world free of hate and racialization has sent a strong message to communities across South Africa about the consequences of spreading hate and discrimination, not only on social media, but in the world today. We hope that others are inspired by their courage, their perseverance, and the commitment shown by the Chinese Association, and will continue to fight until victory is achieved. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Francis Hailong and Ms. Joyce Namford to the stage to receive this award.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, can I just say what a pleasure and an honor to receive this award from the Kathrada Foundation. You know, we're a community body, so we're in awe of an association like the Ahmed Kathrada Association for all the work they've done to fight racism and inequality. You know, we can only hope that, you know, during the time that we had this fight, we had more people that supported us, like your foundation. You know, at the end of the day, it wasn't a fight only for the Chinese community, It is a fight for all communities. And if you look back in history, you'll see the Chinese, the Indian population, and the black population. Throughout history, they have been persecuted and prosecuted, and all the indignities that one could impose upon them have been done so by a few colonial powers. And the Indian and the Chinese civilizations go back 4,000 years. And at one time, they were the wealthiest countries in the world. And history has a way of going full circle. And I'm sure, although there are difficulties between China and India, we don't regard them as the enemy. And I think that they work together in future. And they will be the civilizations of the future that will shape history. And Africa itself will have a population of 1.6 billion people by 2025. And I think it's these three great populations that are going to be the future of this world. It's just ironic that all the fortunes of India and China are sitting in some national museum in Great Britain at the moment. Thank you very much indeed for our award. One more message to the youth. I think the youth here have showed tremendous spirit and foresight today, and I take my hat off to them. And I remember when I grew up in Port Elizabeth, we were one of the poorest Chinese families in the Eastern Cape. And my father died when I was 17 years old. And one of my uncles that was a successful businessman, he arranged to come and see us. And after paying respects to my mom, I was hoping he would bring bags of money for us, and solve our financial problems. But when he came, after paying respects to my mom, he pulled me aside. And I eagerly looked at his hands and saw no bag there of money. But he said to me, only you can decide your future. Only you can change your destiny of your family and yourself. And that was all he left with me. And in the beginning, I was very disappointed. But later on in life, I saw the wisdom of his words, and I passed it on to the youth of today. Thank you.
I just want to say a few words. I'm Joyce Namford. I'm the attorney that brought the case for the Chinese Association. It's not known, the discrimination that the Chinese in South Africa have endured for 400 years. I'm very proud that part of the court record is the history of the discrimination that was inflicted on the Chinese population. This message is a very strong message that the Chinese have the right to equality and dignity in this country. We're part of this rainbow nation. I am South African, born in Port Elizabeth. I studied at Wits. I am proud to be South African, and I'm proud to be Chinese. Thank you.
One more. Well done. Let me just start off by congratulating the winners of this very important award. And to members of the media who are here, please, give some acknowledgement publicly so people know what is happening, what people are doing in the fight against racism, in trying to build non-racialism in our country. So well done. We're very proud of you. A quick one for the younger generation here, just to add to what you've said. In this craziness of apartheid, there were Europeans, they were Bantu, they were Indians, there were coloreds who were neither this nor that. And then there were Japanese who were considered to be honorary whites. Remember that, Valli. You're just old enough to remember that. And then there were Chinese who were not even honorary white. And that's where we come from, this absolute craziness. And that's where we have to navigate our way away from, into something new, into something better. And that's what the Freedom Charter stood for. So I'm going to be a bit longer than my 5 minutes, despite my normal reluctance to speak at these events, just because I carry two hats, if you like. One is the chairperson of the foundation, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and the other one is being on the NEC of the ANC. So, and of course, we have to take our responsibilities as ANC members, as NEC members, seriously. So what we hear here is very important to us. And I think the challenge to us, to you, Comrade Snuki, to you, Valli, maybe not a member of the NEC, and to others here who are members of the ANC, is to not take this matter lightly, to do what we are able to do justice to the country, to make this country a better country, and not only do what you see here, Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, deepening non-racialism, we also have to deepen and entrench democracy. I don't want to repeat what Valli has said. Valli spoke as one would only expect Valli to speak. I was lucky enough, no, he was lucky enough to be in the first cabinet with me, 1994 till 1999. Then Valli carried on, so he occupied the portfolio responsible for local government. He then took on the portfolio of environmental affairs. Whatever Valli has done, he has done with absolute excellence. And tonight you gave one more absolutely excellent performance. Thank you, Valli. We learned a lot from you. We learned a lot from you. Thank you, Snuki, as well, for having been ambushed and not being afraid to take the stage knowing that you weren't completely ready. I think it's important, just wearing that hat of mine, to acknowledge that we have, in many respects, as we have, as the ANC has failed society in many respects. Those are some of the challenges that we have to grapple with, and grapple with urgently and seriously. So on this particular matter, though, I think just some clarity. It was tabled with the NEC. It was tabled at the NEC. It was presumably discussed at the committee that discusses such matters, the committee responsible for governance and constitutional affairs, etc., the relevant committees, tabled at the NEC, and we have to plead guilty. Tabled at the NEC, the two options were presented to the ANC. The work of this panel that was appointed. And there was a minority view and a majority view. And the view that was presented to say, look, we've discussed it. We think that the minority view, albeit a minority view, and I think it was fairly balanced in terms of numbers, but one way or the other, that this minority view, we think for the following reasons, is the best way to go. And we bought it. We bought it, and you're right to criticize us, because we would have said, no, we actually need time. This is so important. We need time to deliberate on it, to think about it, and to act responsibly, because this has long-term and profound implications, and we didn't. We have to own up to that. Valli says, correctly, that it's not too late. I just want to share one little experience with you, Valli, and that goes back to the first session of Parliament, 1994 to 1999. I was then the Minister of Land Affairs. The minister responsible for agriculture was a National Party minister. They prepared a bill approved by Cabinet as things go. That's the procedure. It's tabled in Parliament. It was called the Marketing Act. Janet Love was then the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee. That Marketing Act was really bad. But, you know, that was the nature of that then government of national unity. Tabled in Parliament, Janet Love looked at this thing, the committee looked at this thing, all parties, including the National Party, and they said, this is rubbish, this is junk. They rewrote, Janet took it upon herself to rewrite the entire bill and to come up with a new act altogether. They did it in 2 months. They did it in 2 months. They consulted with the trade unions. They consulted with what was then called the South African Agricultural Union. They achieved agreement. All parties supported it in that portfolio committee in 2 months. So I want to say just again, wearing my two hats, I support what Comrade Ismail is putting to this meeting. I think we need that meeting, Valli and Snuki. That meeting has to happen with the minister and happen urgently, because there is room for change. And it is quite clear, of course there has to be room for change. And it is quite clear that the message that you present, although there's a bit of cynicism, to be quite honest, because what has happened in reality doesn't quite correspond with what was conveyed to you, Comrade Snooki. The fact of the matter is, though, we can't just sit back, whether we are ANC members or not ANC members, as Kathrada Foundation members, or as the Chinese Association, or any one member of civil society here. The future of our country and the future of democracy in our country is at stake. And we have to do everything that we need to do in order to get the best outcome here. We can't just sit back. The implications are too serious. So in the Freedom Charter, this theme here is the people must govern. Freedom Charter says the people shall govern. What the Freedom Charter drawn up in Kliptown in 1955 doesn't say is exactly how will the people govern. They couldn't have envisaged then, Valli and others here, they couldn't have envisaged the kind of problems that we're experiencing today. When they said the people shall govern, they assumed the people, the government will act on behalf of the people, will act honestly, will do the best to serve the people with humility. If the Freedom Charter were revised today, it would say many very different things. It would say the people shall govern, and those who govern on behalf of the people shall govern without corruption, will govern honestly, and will serve the people with humility. That would be some kind of revised Freedom Charter. Lastly, our constitution, one of the ANC's principles is that we fight for a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. What is lacking a little bit is the detail of what we mean by democratic South Africa. How do we ensure real democracy, real representation, real accountability? So I think you've done, don't underestimate the importance of this year's annual lecture. I think, Valli, you've done it justice, more than justice. I think we need to take up these struggles because, what did Kathrada say? It's not only just about the right to vote and the right to, and freedom is not handed to us on a platter. That struggle for real social justice, real freedom, real deepening of democracy, real non-racialism is an ongoing struggle. It doesn't just happen. So keep it up. You who have taken up this issue so vigorously, it's not a petty thing. It's a very important thing. So keep up that fight. And so lastly, then, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. A big tribute to all of you who have taken this matter on. Keep it up. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Derek. Just a few announcements before you go. So there is some refreshments here. So we please ask all of you to spend some time, talk through the issues as well, raise some more ideas, engage with the person who was wearing two hats on stage now about what that actually means and what his other hat in the ANC needs to do so that the other hat that he wears with the Kathrada Foundation can be happy with the one other hat that he's wearing. This has been powerful. It's been powerful because I think we're beginning to understand what's at stake for our country and what we need to do beyond thinking that everything is hopeless. It's not hopeless. We need to change this thing so that we get the best South Africans, either as independents or through political parties that exist or that might still to be formed, into public office. For too long, we've been cynical about public office, and our cynicism has created the basis for those less capable and less interested in serving the public to actually go into office. And I think that that has to change. There has to be a mindset shift amongst huge numbers of South Africans that national service requires the best possible people in public office, even if it's for a short period of time, to break the current logjam and to break the mess that we are in. We need that. Otherwise, there is no hope. And we need to do that at the provincial level and at local levels throughout this country. So That's the kind of work that I think is waiting for all of us. Irfan has asked me to ask all of you to go and look at the youth pages of the Kathrada Foundation. They are begging and pleading for money. They're organizing a youth camp at the end of November. They want to get 120 odd young people for a 4 or 5 day youth camp, many of them who are here, to reinforce their understanding of the legacy of Kathrada, understand our constitution, but more importantly, to refine their own skills as young activists to go and do the work in their communities that are required. So please, those of you who can, Irfan, there's no other details. There's a Kathrada youth page. Those of you who understand this will know what he's talking about. I don't. But you will hear more from the foundation and Defend Our Democracy, Rivonia Circles, and KSAC, and My Vote Counts, and a number of other organizations in the next few days about what is being done and what contributions are required from you, not necessarily money. But if every organization does what we are hoping to do on the 29th of October, the Member of Parliament deployed to the Lenasia constituency office, Mohamed Dango, has agreed to come to a public meeting there to come and, he says, I don't also understand the bill, but I want to hear what people are saying about the bill so that when I go to the NCOP, I know what they are saying. And if others can use the same approach, I think they can be educated and take the right message back into the NCOP and possibly amongst their colleagues in Parliament as well. And all organizations here can do the same. Call your Member of Parliament, or not call the Member of Parliament who's deployed to some constituency office near you. Ask them to come and talk to this thing. Force them, put the necessary pressure on them. Friends, comrades, thank you very much for your attendance. It's just been wonderful having you here.
Never ever. Although we were sentenced to life imprisonment, and for political prisoners, life meant life. We want Robben Island to be a monument. One wants to perpetuate the positive aspects, and that is a place of triumph. Because Robben Island played a very important role in the struggle, although we were in prison. And the struggle to crush apartheid was in some ways less difficult than the struggle we are facing now.
After 26 years, Kathy and his comrades walked free, infusing the struggle with new hope.
was waiting for him. I had waited long, and we met again. It was a moving experience, and became very clear that nowhere in the world the human spirit can be destroyed by a tyrant or an oppressor.
6 months later, Nelson Mandela was also a free man. They negotiated an end to apartheid and set to work building a new nation. Prisoner Mandela became President Mandela. With Kathrada as his advisor, they chose a path of truth and reconciliation over revenge. Old comrades worked with the young leaders to make their highest ideals the law of the land. Kathy taught people in South Africa and around the world about the history, triumphs and lessons of the journey to freedom. He is a vigilant champion of ethical standards and of racial equality.
He has been a great instrument of the movement. That is what he has brought. Confidence in the future.
I found him to be a great fountain of wisdom.
He is a selfless person. He's made an enormous contribution.
You know, he connects to the issues that affect us as ordinary human beings.
He has contributed significantly to our rainbow nation.
Ahmed Kathrada remained core part of the leadership of our struggle at the time.
Freedom to be achieved has to be fought for, has to be sacrificed. There has to be sacrifices. Freedom you don't get on a platter. Nobody has given freedom on a platter to anybody. It has to be fought for.
They had passion for what they were doing. They didn't do it for name and fame.
South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white.
They were very brave to make the kind of sacrifices that they made.
We are deeply grateful that today we live in a lively democracy.
But he's so warm and he's so humble for a person of his status and his legacy.
You'd expect someone of his stature to actually be proud and, you know, he'd want to be praised, but that is not who he is.
He's basically teaching us about non-racialism. There's an incredibly good heart in Kathy that I think most people recognize and respond to. And, you know, that is a privilege to live with someone with such a good heart.
His life is a legacy of an ongoing example of the unbeatable power of love and the triumph of the human spirit.